I think we'll start off with some introductions. I'll start with myself. My name is Scott Zadakis. I'm the vice chair of RTAC, and I work with the National Rural Transit Assistance Program. Len, you want to go ahead?
Scott, I do apologize for interrupting. If you could actually just run through the guidelines quickly.
Sure. Do you want to do that, or do you want me to?
Yeah. That's totally fine. And my apologies again. So just to let everybody know, this meeting is being recorded. So everybody is joining the meeting with muted microphones. That being said, you do have the ability to mute and unmute yourself. If you could please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation, should you have one, that would be fantastic. And to participate in the discussion, you can select the raise hand function. Depending on the version of Zoom that you are using, this can be found in a few different places. It may just be at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You may need to click on the reactions button. And if you don't find it there, you may need to click on the participants window and find it in there. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can contact me, Matt Archer, either via the chat box through marcher@ctps.org or 857-702-3708. And with that interruption, Scott, I will pass it back to you for introductions.
All right. Well, Matt, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I am Matt Archer, Transportation Planner and Coordinator for the Regional Transportation Advisory Council at the NPO.
Okay. And Len?
Hi, I'm Leonard Diggins, and I am the chair of the Advisory Council, and I represent the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee on this body.
John Strauss?
Hi, I'm John. Thanks, Scott. And I'm from the Burlington Transportation Committee in Burlington.
I'm Megan Jopp.
I am the Executive Director for the Town of Wellesley.
And Colette.
Hi, yes, it's Colette Frank, and I'm a member of the Select Board in Wellesley, and my portfolio assignment includes transportation and mobility.
John McQueen.
John McQueen, Walk Boston.
Dan Martin.
Hi, Dan Martin with Brookline Transportation Department.
David Montgomery.
Hi, David Montgomery with the Town of Needham.
Andy.
Andy Reeker, Transit Planner at the Community Development Department in the City of Cambridge.
And Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Rowe. I'm a planner with the City of Boston Transportation Department.
And Franny, hello.
Hi, Franny Osmond, Acton Transportation Committee, as well as various regional boards, including Lowell Regional Transit Authority. And I'm gonna apologize for being off picture for a little while because I don't want to make you dizzy, because as usual, I'm too timing with walking my dog.
It looks nice.
I figure may as well get exercise instead of just sitting in front of the screen.
Hey, I'm envious. Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, Westwood Planning Board, representing the Trick subregion.
And John Seward.
John Seward, Booth, Mass.
Alexis Walls.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alexis Walls. I work with the Massachusetts Public Health Association, and I also help co-chair the Regional Transit Authority Advocates Coalition with staff from Transportation for Massachusetts.
Fred.
Yeah, Fred Mosley, representing the American Council of Engineering Companies.
Sandy. I think we're muted.
Hi, sorry, Sandy Lasky, Town of Sudbury Transportation Committee.
Anna Christina.
Oh, Anna Christina Fragoso, and I'm with the Boston Society of Civil Engineers.
Matthew Peterson.
Hi, sorry, Matthew Peterson. I'm a program manager at Transit Matters, a transit advocacy group.
Julia Sheehan.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a graduate social work intern with the Massachusetts Public Health Association.
Okay. And have I missed anyone? Is there anyone else that I've missed? I don't think so. Okay. So with that, I think we're just going to jump in. So we have two guest speakers, Colette O'Frank and Megan Jopp. Colette is the Wellesley Select with the Wellesley Select Board, and Megan is the Executive Director of General Government Services in Wellesley. So we're just gonna have them talk a little bit about what's going on in Wellesley and transportation in the region. So I don't know if one of you plan to go first, or but it's up to you guys.
Okay, thank you so much, Scott. I'm going to share my screen. If you can stop sharing, I will share.
You should be able to freely interrupt my sharing without no interruption.
All right.
Thanks for being here.
There, you're welcome. Okay. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So again, hello and thank you for having us at your meeting today. As we said earlier, I'm the select board member working on transportation, and part of my job is the representative at the Metro West Regional Transport Authority Advisory Board, the MBTA Advisory Board, MAPC, and generally attending any meetings that are of interest for transportation. And I'm here today with Megan Jopp, as she said, Executive Director of General Government Services. So we're here today really to share ideas and feedback from our perspective as a municipality and consumer of services provided by our RTA, and as a partner working with our RTA to pilot new transportation initiatives. We're also sharing our perspective as a municipality with goals to decrease single occupancy vehicle use, to increase public transportation use by our residents and visitors, and to meet our climate action goals. And so to that end, I'll share a little background about Wellesley, our microtransit pilot in partnership with our RTA, our transportation goals, and areas that we see as opportunities to support the transportation services provided through our RTAs. After sharing that information, we can open up to a Q&A and just a general conversation. So a little bit of background about Wellesley. Wellesley has a population of about 29,500 residents. We're served by the MBTA through 3 regional rail stations on the Framingham and Worcester line. None of these stations are currently ADA accessible. We are in fairly close proximity to the westernmost Green Line stations of the D branch in Newton. So that's Riverside Station, Woodland Station, and Woburn Station. Wellesley is also served by the Metro West Regional Transportation Authority, or the MWRTA. And from our cherry sheets, we're assessed approximately $285,000 to the MBTA and $364,000 to the MWRTA. Before COVID, the MWRTA ran 2 buses through Wellesley. We had the Route 1 bus service, and that is ongoing. It's a commuter hours bus service, and it runs from the Natick Mall to Woodland Station, largely along Route 9, with a flag down service and 2 stops in Wellesley, including 1 at Mass Bay College. The Route 8 circular bus previously ran through Wellesley to Woodland T Station. Half or more of that ridership was made up of staff and students at Babson College during the academic year. And peak monthly ridership was at the 700s level, with regular monthly non-college term ridership around 300 to 400. Our RTA also provides a hospital shuttle to the Longwood Medical Area, the ride, and provides services for our Municipal Council on Aging shuttle. So why microtransit? There were concerns over a lack of ridership growth and long headways on our intra-Wellesley circular bus route even before COVID. And COVID decimated the ridership. And in late 2020, the MWRTA approached Wellesley with the concept of piloting microtransit. Microtransit is a concept similar to Uber or Lyft, but it's serviced by our RTA. Riders call up a ride, ideally using a smartphone app, but they can call in on the phone. It's a door-to-door service. It's first come, first served, and it is fully ADA compliant. The vehicles are Ford Transit type, typically carrying 4 passengers, but we do have a larger vehicle aimed at servicing peak ridership to and from Babson College. An electric vehicle pilot is hoped for soon, but that is really pending an appropriate vehicle to road test. Currently, our service is fare-free, but fares will likely be in the $2 to $3 range. Hours of service are Monday to Friday, 6:45 a.m. to 6:45 p.m. And ideally, we would like to expand our service to nights and weekends, but driver shortages and building ridership are limiting factors. Service goals identified by the RTA include wait times for a ride under 30 minutes and passengers per vehicle hour between 3 and 4. Initial plans were for an intra-Wellesley trip service only, and we discussed at the outset adding select locations just over our borders, including Newton Wellesley Hospital, Riverside, Woodland and Woburn T stations in Newton, connection to fixed route bus services in Natick, and then later expanding to select Needham destinations, including Volante Farms, Needham Heights MBTA station, which is ADA accessible, and Trader Joe's. The microtransit service continues to be heavily used by Babson College and staff students, about 45% of our trips. It is a connector from town to T or town to transportation, which is just about 20% of our rides, and it's growing in its service of retail locations. So it's very much a first mile, last mile solution and a connector to public transportation. Ridership has certainly grown to levels exceeding pre-pandemic fixed route ridership numbers, with similar usage patterns between Babson and other town riders. Rapid growth with college opening in September was challenging and resulted in wait times exceeding service standards, which continue to need the addition of driver hours, tweaking of algorithms in the app, and app modifications to mitigate. We currently have 3 vehicles in service with approximately 210 vehicle hours per week. We meet and discuss the service monthly with our RTA. So what are Wellesley's other transport-related strategic initiatives? Over the last year, we have been developing our climate action plan to meet greenhouse gas emission goals, and those goals match the state and federal benchmarks. We've also been developing a sustainable mobility plan aimed at enhancing and increasing modes of transportation other than single occupancy vehicle. So think public transportation, walking and biking for commuting to work and getting to school. So the microtransit pilot and changes to the MBTA scheduling, moving away from commuter scheduling to clock face scheduling, very much dovetailed with the direction that we wanted to head in as a municipality with our climate action plan and our sustainable mobility plan. So what are the opportunities to enhance public transportation and change behavior? People who need or want to take public transportation are making concessions in terms of flexibility and travel time. So we feel that we need to do all we can to make it as simple and easy as possible to take public transportation. And this is going to be especially critical if we want to encourage non-transit dependent riders out of their cars and onto public transportation. It just needs to be as easy and simple a transition as possible. So what do we see from our experiences as an opportunity for support? what I would say, the first thing we're going to talk about is the concept of getting from here to there across multiple systems, and should we have a more regional perspective. People need to travel from point A to point B, maybe via school or a caregiver, maybe stopping for errands along the way. And our transportation authorities and services may or may not align with their travel path. Each RTA has its own website and its route planner, and making connections between RTAs or other transport services can be challenging. Wellesley abuts Newton, Needham, Dover, Natick, and Weston, but there are no good public transportation connections to our immediate neighbours in Needham or Dover or Weston. And this lack of public transportation connections isn't necessarily limited to our immediate neighbours, but includes places like Cambridge, Waltham, Watertown, and a direct connection to Logan Express in Framingham, and possibly more areas where our residents may want to shop, work, receive services, or socialise. So how do we capture where people are travelling and commuting, but there's no existing public transportation option? We've heard repeatedly that there's cell phone data that can be of use here. Taking that data could be the first step in identifying gaps in transportation and where RTAs could potentially develop fixed route systems, microtransit services, and connections between RTAs. One thing I'd like to touch on a little bit is fare connection mechanisms. A user may use an app or a Charlie card for the MBTA, or an app for microtransit, and possibly more than one if you're using microtransit where you live and microtransit where you work. You may have a prepaid fare account for hospital shuttles or the ride. You may have identification cards for discounted rides or more. Our own RTA is developing a unique chip card system to pay for fixed route bus service and accepts a Charlie card. So depending on how many RTA regions you might have to cross, you may have to navigate these systems of payment mechanisms in more than one system. Having one fare collection system, or at least reducing the number and standardizing as much as possible fare collection systems, would be an important step to identify and simplify the rider experience. I'd like to talk a little bit about applications or apps, especially for microtransit, and some of the learnings that we may have had through our pilots. There are several microtransit pilots in place right now, and some are in neighbouring towns. All of these services have their own app. Some apps are developed in-house, and some are served by national vendors. For the user, that means using multiple apps and managing multiple accounts if you're transiting in more than one area. For the service providers and municipalities, is there an opportunity to share experiences and feedback, including things like, what are service parameters and are they being met? What are your performance metrics? What are the hurdles that have been overcome? How did you manage pre-booking needs, for example, medical appointments? Who's really using the transportation and for what purpose? What's the destination type? What is the end cost per rider and the subsidy level? What are the funding sources and partnerships that have been successful? What is the level of ride sharing seen in practice? And what are the data sets and developer dashboards that are being collected? And how has that been helpful in improving the service? What data is meaningful? What gaps in transportation have been identified? Do you have demand maps? What has customer service experience been like for riders and municipalities? What are marketing strategies that were adopted? What was effective? And does it make sense to develop an app in-house or leverage a national vendor, which might result in a more familiar app experience for riders across different towns? These are just some suggested areas for conversation and learning. Another area to discuss is marketing. Effective marketing is really critical in sharing transportation changes, including new services, to transit-dependent riders, and in converting new riders to services that they might not be aware of. A lot has changed for public transportation during COVID. How can we support the RTAs with marketing strategies and know-how? It takes significant investment in developing expertise to launch a coordinated marketing campaign across multiple platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or even TikTok if we are seeking to reach a youth market. What's a reasonable budget? What are effective strategies? And how can you measure impact? Are there some regional approaches we can take that would be allow us to have some efficiencies? And finally, each RTA has a very distinctive website. And again, that can be challenging for a user across multiple RTAs. Can we support the RTAs with centralized consultants to offer website upgrades with similar features and navigation wherever that's appropriate? So in summary, I would just like to say from our perspective as a municipality and a consumer of transportation services, we see opportunities to make a more seamless rider experience by focusing on regionalization, simplifying fare collection mechanisms, making the app experience for users more familiar and consistent, supporting marketing efforts, and providing support to upgrading websites. And we also feel there's an opportunity to share experiences across different pilots, especially in the collection and analysis of microtransit data. And with that, I'd be happy to open up for general discussion and questions and answers.
Okay, thanks, Colette. That was really a well put together presentation. So I had a couple questions, but then you answered them as you went along. So that's, I will kick off one though. So did you end up going with a national vendor? Or did you end up developing something in-house?
So I'd say that wasn't really our choice. That choice was made at the RTA level before we were engaged in the conversation. Our RTA is developing their own app. Although I have spoken with both Newton and Salem, who are using a national vendor called VIA. And I think that's the only, I think I've seen that also Worcester RTA. I read somewhere we're doing a micro transit pilot and also using VIA. That's the only other service provider I've seen or talked to anyone that's used. I do believe that Lyft earlier did not offer a service along these lines, but recently has offered something that municipalities could use. It's very much a ride sharing service, and it wouldn't necessarily be a pickup and delivery service if it was just one rider. And it's offering a back-end service to allow municipalities to subsidize shared rides, essentially. But I don't know too much about that.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions for Colette? Looks like John has one.
Hi, thanks very much, Scott. Yes, I had a question for Colette. The ride sharing program or the microtransit that you were talking about, is that something that it's handled financially by the town of Wellesley itself, or do you have subsidies or some other funding source available to you?
So at this point, the funding is through the RTA. So we had 2 bus services through the RTA, and one of them was discontinued and replaced with this pilot service. I do believe the RTA did apply for grants in connection with this, but I don't have a lot of background to the structure of the financing of this pilot. Other pilots run in other towns are financed differently through grants directly to the municipalities, but that's the way that ours runs here in Wellesley. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Megan.
Yeah, so the only other thing I would add, so initially when the town went to the RTA and tried to establish the fixed bus route service, which has been since the Route 8, our fixed Route 8 has been converted to the microtransit. That was through a job access and reverse commute grant. And as that phased out, we obviously phased in our MBTA assessment to cover that. So really the funding mechanism today is through the assessment and through, they're obviously looking to leverage different ARPA, funds at this time to try and propel that further, and are also looking at modifying the fleet to electric vehicles and trying, to assist with reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that way as well.
Oh, great, thank you. And so in other words, the RTA, the Wellesley RTA owns the cars that you use, and then the MBTA grant, the money that you use the MBA, did you have to? Was there some mechanism involved in transferring those funds over to your RTA to subsidize the microtransit? I only ask because we're going to be facing this kind of thing in Burlington. We got rid of our own little bus route, and right now we're part of the LIFT program, which is fine, and it helps out a lot, of course, as you know, in suburban where things are spread out and disconnected. This is a very practical solution to jump into right away. But I find that, especially for the fixed income people here in Burlington, that sometimes the price will jump. And so you're expecting to pay $1 a ride, and you wind up suddenly the price being $7 or $8, which may be feasible in some cases. $20 or $25, which for fixed income people is out of the question. So that's why so you're in charge of, and you set the fares for the microtransit. Is that correct?
So we as a town don't set the fares for microtransit. The RTA sets the fares, and that's something that the advisory board is involved in. And we are the advice. And so now I'm going to talk about the advisory board. The advisory board will meet again in January to consider fares. And I will say from my perspective, when we talked about fare reintroduction, I was very sensitive to the fact that we've gone from a bus fare ride that was $1 or $1.50 to paying for microtransit at $2 to $3 per ride. Now, while it's a great service, it's the only service we have. There's no other alternative for our riders here. So through no choice of theirs, their fare increase is 100%. So it was something I was very sensitive to when we were discussing the fares with the RTA, and I would really like to keep fares at the $2 level, to be honest. And that's similar to other pilots that are in neighboring towns. And I think I'm missing one of your other questions, John.
Well, the other question was simply the ability to keep the fare. In other words, if a fixed income person from Burlington took a Lyft ride through the microtransit program we're running now, I guess, which a lot of other towns participate in as well, you might get charged, might get charged $1, which is $1 to go around Burlington. The town takes care of the rest. And then coming back because of what they call, not congestion pricing, but I forgot the exact term that they use, surge pricing. I forgot what they have a phrase for the particular thing, demand pricing, whatever. And then suddenly they add $15 onto the price of the ride. So a fixed income person is not going to be able to handle this. And now what do? Do they stay where they are in the snow and whatever and wait for another ride to hopefully the fare drops? Or, is the town going to step up and pay this extra money? So this is the little consideration that we're kind of looking at right now. And it's just, with your particular situation, how do you guys handle something like that?
So we're not really faced with that fare volatility. Our fares are fixed. But I'd say the flip side of that is that when there's peak demand, the weights are variable. And right now we're faced with some weights that are outside our service parameters. And so we're working to bring them down. But with the way this particular pilot is structured, the fares are not variable. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Megan.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, so this is somewhat of a limited service Monday through Friday, essentially, from about 6 a.m. to 6:45 p.m. and, no weekend service. So where you would be seeing surge prices potentially in the evening hours or weekend services, we're not experiencing that because the service doesn't exist. And I think Colette nailed it. What we are experiencing then is during those peak demand times, significant waits. So, there is a shared ride service. So we've been working with the MWRTA in particular for those destination times that tend to be the most popular in terms of, let's say, for Babson students who tend to be heavy riders, picking them up at, trying to get a larger group together, a larger vehicle to pick up sort of more shared rides at those preferred times or peak time demands. But certainly then without that at present, what we are experiencing is, you know, sort of the one-time person who, oh, I may try this today, they may experience a significant wait, and then, you know, it might turn them off. That's our fear, right? That it might turn them off forever, right? that they don't want to go that route, or have to pay higher pricing points to go with the more commercial Uber or Lyft services.
Exactly. And the one thing I wanted to talk about is that even though you get the benefit when you're a client of Lyft of having, you know, all day and all night type of service, this particular, one of the big fare increases was about $8. It was like 3 p.m. on Wednesday. So hardly a really surge time. It just, the computer figured something somehow. And I didn't know if you had a control on that if you had seniors or fixed income people, that they were always protected and always just paid $1, and they didn't have to worry about this. Because you're right, it would be, what are you going to do if you're stuck in the snow and this is your ride, or you're going to walk? So, okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. So we have a number of questions. I'm going to try to go in order if my memory serves me correct. I think Franny was next.
Yes. Hi, it's really great to hear, and what a great, clear, complete presentation. Thank you. We've been looking into microtransit for a while out here in the other part of Metro West, North Metro West, and we even had MAPC do a bunch of, with Travis Pollock involved, do presentations from all of the national or companies, all the ones that shared that responded to their RFP. So it was really useful to see. I just have 3 questions, so I'll ask them and then let you answer them separately. One is, how much money does Wellesley put, because Acton has put a lot of money of its own taxpayer money into our transportation program. And I was just wondering how, beyond the assessments. Another is, how has this, I heard that the fixed route wasn't as useful, but did you stop any of the fixed route service or the curb to curb in order to, as a result of using microtransit? And the third question is how the service has covered long versus short trips. When we spoke to Transloc, another national company, about possibly doing a pilot, they were very interested in the very short trips. And I know that one challenge we have, that one gap we have, in addition to evenings and weekends, is the longer trips, often medical, but not always. So I'm full of questions and I don't need to answer them all now. I'm glad to hear of this work you're doing and look forward to talking to you outside of this sometime.
Sure, and I'd be happy to talk offline, but I'll try and hit these quickly. Wellesley is not putting money in addition to our assessment into this pilot, because we had an existing service. It was discontinued and replaced with this pilot. So our services from the RTA include the things that went over in our presentation today. It was simply a swap of one service for another. So your second question was, how did it affect fixed route services? We did stop. We eliminated our circular. It's gone. So our residents don't have that option anymore. All they have is the microtransit and the Route 1 commuter bus that runs along Route 9, has 2 stops in Wellesley and a flag down, but the flagging down on Route 9 is not that possible because it's not so safe. So those are the services that we have. And how do you service longer rides? So the parameters of Wellesley's 10 square miles. So each trip really shouldn't be more than 20 minutes, I would say. And the locations that we've selected are just outside of Wellesley's borders to extend the service to medical, transportation, and we had one request through our Chamber of Commerce to try and help a worker to get to Volante Farms, which is really just over the border, and that is on the way to Trader Joe's and the MBTA station in Needham, so it makes sense to include that as a little loop. So managing the trips, I guess, it's a factor of, you know, what your service area is. But one of the things I think that's identified in my conversations with Newton and Salem is that I think that from their experience, and I'd say from our experience too, a minimum of 3 vehicles is required, a minimum, and possibly more than that, because it runs pretty well until you get a bunch of people calling in at once, and then things start to back up, or it's peak time, or there's a lot of traffic. And so at those peak times and those traffic times, you might need more than 3 drivers, but that's been the experience so far, that a minimum of 3 vehicles is necessary. And I think that's something that I touched on in our presentation is data, and getting the data out the back ends of these systems so you can analyze what's happening, when are the wait times, where are you heading with these long wait times, what's the types of trips they're taking, what's the sharing, you know, should we have longer hold times before you fill rides so that you can reduce wait times, increase sharing. So the back end systems, I think, are really critical. And I think that's a big question. And do you develop your own system, or do you get a national vendor system? Because I would say, just from a very brief review of what comes from different systems, they're different. It takes a lot to develop an app and put a back end system in. Right now, we get a fairly raw dump of data, and we spend quite a long time analyzing it. What I've seen from a national vendor is there are, you know, a portfolio of available reports, and, you know, you can add to that. And so there's, you know, is there an advantage to going with the national versus bespoke? I think that's a bigger discussion to be had. I don't know if you have anything to add, Megan.
No, the only other thing I would add is under the MWRTA service, we are not adding additional taxpayer dollars, but we certainly have sort of some smaller satellite programs with our COA that offers sort of a different menu of services, you know, largely towards medical and, you know, those very short sort of planned trips to the grocery store, et cetera. And those are paid through tax dollars, but the MWRTA, we're not injecting, as Colette had said, any additional funds at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next one, I believe was, no, sorry, it was Alexis. And I see your question, but maybe you just want to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again so much for that presentation. It was super helpful. So I have a few questions just like Franny, and I'll just ask a few, and then any others I'll sort of follow up offline. So one of the questions, and this is the one that's in the chat, was just around how this came about. So I know that there was the service that was discontinued, but is that something that you all had, is that something that you all knew was necessary because you knew that the fixed route service, like the Route 8 was not efficient? And so did you pressure the MWRTA to see if they would discontinue it so you could use microtransit in its place? Or is that something that they discontinued on their own and they approached you about this as a solution?
So the RTA approached us, and I was actually a very new select board member at the time, so it certainly wasn't being driven by me. But I believe it was in a 5-year plan for the RTA to pilot microtransit, and they chose this Wellesley to pilot that with, because we'd had it was identified that we had a fixed route service with long headways and low ridership, and sort of a little bit of a failure to blossom. And so this was a suggestion from the RTA to us.
Okay, that's super helpful. And then the other question I just had, you had mentioned identifying gaps in transit, which I agree is incredibly important from a regional perspective. A lot of the advocates on our coalition identify interregional connectivity as sort of like one of the big, like outside of funding, to be one of the biggest issues in different RTA communities. And so you had mentioned cell phone data being used to identify, you know, some of those gaps regionally. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, how that data can be helpful, and then if that's something that you all have already started to use in Wellesley?
So I'd say I'd heard about cell phone data being a resource for analyzing trips at an MPO meeting that I've been at. So I've heard a few times now that cell phone data can be useful, or maybe even an MAPC meeting. We don't have that data, and I'm not sure that we're equipped to analyze that. I think that's more of a larger planning organization's role, is to say, okay, let's get this data and see where people are traveling and when, because then you're kind of figuring out the drivers that are potential public transportation riders. And I'm aware, just from sort of casual conversation in my town, that there's a number of people here that work in Cambridge, but there is no public transportation option short of going into Boston and then going back out to Cambridge, or a very lengthy sort of transit experience with a bus transfer. So if you can identify, is there a cluster of people maybe in Wellesley, Natick and Weston that are going back and forward to Cambridge at the same times, maybe it makes sense to make a transportation there. That's my kind of instinct, but I have no data to back that up. Maybe we have people that are going back and forward to Waltham or Watertown or Needham, and I just don't know about that. I don't have the data to do that. So that's kind of where I was coming from with that comment.
Okay, that makes sense. And then last question, I promise, which is just going back to the marketing piece, and just thinking about, how to get non-transit dependent folks to be transit users. And that again is something that is sort of echoed amongst some of our advocates, this idea of like, yes, service should be more convenient, more flexible, and funding is required to make that happen. But then once that does happen, in several communities, there's a stigma around riding the bus or utilizing transit. And I think, microtransit is maybe a little bit different, and perhaps there isn't the same stigma. I'm not sure, but I'm just curious in thinking about the different marketing that you all have done to encourage folks to utilize microtransit services as well as the fixed route service that still is in existence. Yeah, have you seen any success in that, or have you done any work to sort of like address that culture or that stigma around transit use, if it existed in the first place in Wellesley?
So I'd say some approaches that we took were we really focused on, I'd say transit dependent people first, because we needed to make them aware of this service, because our original fixed route service wasn't serving a lot of people. So we wanted to reach more. So it took a while to kind of get us off the ground and running, to set up a training meeting or a networking meeting with RTA staff and members of our library, our social work department, our council on aging, our public housing authority. Who else was in that meeting, Megan? I can't remember someone. Agencies like that, so social service connectors, to tell them about the service. The biggest question we got at first is, what is microtransit? It's hard to find a name that people understand. That's why I always talk about Uber or Lyft, because people kind of know what that is. So the first thing is, what is it? How does it work? Where's the app? Walk us through the app. What's the pricing? Is it really free? Because we did have a free pilot, so, and just trying to educate people on what the service was. So that was a big part of it. We've done town newsletters. We did have a sandwich board at our summer pond to try and encourage youth use. I'd say we haven't seen any youth use. We talked to our Chamber of Commerce and tried to share it with them, like local employers, which we did get some interest there. And our RTA did do a Facebook push and does some postings on Twitter. I don't have any data as to how effective that was, and that's why I think it's hard. I've done a little marketing in another area in my life on those platforms. It's really hard to navigate that, and if we have 10 towns trying to figure out how to market on Facebook, how to do the disclosures, what's the target audience, how do you measure your success? I wonder if there's a role for a more centralized agency to help and be the centralized marketer for transportation in any given locality.
One thing I would just add to that too is we did try and think outside the box, and we're fortunate to have actually 3 colleges in town, but one is an entrepreneurial school, right? So we reached out to Babson, and our assistant executive director was able, so each semester, you can apply to see if you could get into a graduate program to basically have a class of graduate students prepare an analysis for you. And so we were able to be accepted into having an analysis to look at this exact thing, to look at the marketability marketing study of the MWRTA and help us with that push. The challenge was we didn't get graduate students to sign up for it. So, you know, we still have that out there, and they have indicated they may be able to try and push that for the fall semester, or they have like a short, potentially a short summer program. But, you know, so that's been a downside because we have used them previously to do some analysis for us for our downtown, to do some market studies and with the vacancy rates, which I'm sure many of you in your communities are experiencing as well. And then, you know, having that lack of transportation isn't helping that, right? As we all know, it's this interconnected notion of getting people to places, to work, to live. So I would say that's you know, we've been trying to think creatively, as Colette said, and really we have a sort of assembled a mobility committee to try and think creatively about that from different aspects. So from social services, from police, from DPW, you know, what would we need for infrastructure? What would we need for social services? You know, how can we promote that? And then, so we have seen gaining success for sure. And that's where then, you know, once you start getting a little bit of success, that's where sometimes you get challenges. So now we're getting increased wait times. How do you mitigate that? Or increased challenges, as Colette had said, on the app. Or Wellesley also has, of our commuter rail stations, the clock face, the MBTA has moved to a clock face schedule, which has been very positive. But we have 3 stations that are not accessible for ADA riders. So that's where the microtransit becomes critical. And do we get them to a location? Do we get them to an ADA accessible platform? So, you know, these challenges keep coming. Now we're sort of trying to face the challenges, and that's where the app comes up. So we have an individual who may have to do 4 apps to get to work, you know, where you would need MBTA, RTA, lifts. So I think that's where we've really come up with, it would be great to take, so there's regional approaches, and we're all working in regional, but it's that inter-regional challenge that Alexis has talked about that we're really struggling with.
Thank you.
So we have a couple more questions. We're going to try to get through them quickly because we're running a little behind schedule, but thanks for waiting. Andy and David will be after that, and I think we'll have to call that quits after that. So Andy, go ahead.
Sounds good. I just wanted to really appreciate you, Colette and Megan. I feel like I gained a lot of value from the presentation. Cambridge, of course, you all mentioned maybe some commute troubles. When we've looked at kind of regional travel demand in the past, I think we agree that there's probably a travel demand origin destination kind of pair between Cambridge and Metro West in general that is not well served by public transit today. So not that we could resolve that in this particular meeting, but you know, hopefully we can work towards something that would resolve a lot of those concerns. You know, I had to tune out because somebody knocked on my door to ask me a question for a minute. So you may have covered this, but I just wanted to get a sense. I understand that you all had to discontinue the service because it was not particularly efficient, right? Not carrying as many riders as would be kind of whatever the standard is kind of for Metro West. Do you feel like you've been able to at least meet kind of that with this new service, is try to at least make sure that the same amount of people that had service before are able to get some equivalent level of service? Or do you feel like you've even maybe gone beyond that because it is more flexible? It's kind of a question that we hear even in Cambridge for some of our lower demand origin destinations outside of Cambridge to Cambridge or within Cambridge that we are thinking about, would microtransit work? And so I'm wondering if you have a sense of that efficiency kind of from a service perspective.
So we did, it was a little bit of a slow burn to start with because I'd say there was still COVID and there was information to get out to people and people were still reluctant to get on public transport. But at this point we have recovered and then some of the ridership that we had before. Where I think it's challenging is People who are transit dependent used to be able to depend on a bus that came at a time and took them to a place. And now when we have service problems where they're waiting 30 minutes or more, 40 an hour, that's really hard when you're transit dependent and you're just kind of waiting outside for a pickup. So that's the trade-off with that. We are servicing more people, but we've got some work to do to make to just make better service. But I'm not sure that experience. I did have a conversation with the transportation planner in Newton. They've managed to overcome those differences. So I hope that we can get there and make it effective and efficient. But it certainly has grown transportation use.
Great. So last we have David Montgomery.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Colette and Megan, for a very helpful presentation. I just want to make one quick observation about the nomenclature. I heard a lot in your answers and your presentation, the word we, and I think we had always set out for me, who's the we here? And I think it shifted a lot. At times it's we, it's the WRTA, and other times it's Wellesley. And that's the nature of the beast. You wear both those hats, I get it, but we have to be careful in assuming we are making these decisions consistently in the same format, because I think oftentimes you're in different roles. But with that in mind, I'm sort of wondering to what extent the MWRTA acts as kind of the leader of decision making, or the hub, the place where stuff happens, and to what extent there is oxygen left in the room for you all in Wellesley, independent, to be doing things separately. And full disclosure, we've been thinking in Needham for a long time about how we should be trying to find ways to cooperate with folks like you, because we're right next door, and we have regional dreams of creating shuttle service that's in coordination with you all. And we wonder, does that mean we should be in touch primarily with the two of you, or with the MWRTA, or somebody else? So those are my thoughts, and I'm sure we'll try to pick up with you outside of this forum, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. Thanks.
Yeah, and you're right. I think I have been using we for everything, because I think we work in partnership with the RTA, but the RTA is the decision maker here. It's they're deciding what the service is, and we meet with them monthly to kind of go over the results and feedback and kind of ask questions and make suggestions. But at this point, they're the ones that are deciding, the resources that are applied there. I don't know if you have something to add on that, Megan.
No, I think that's exactly right. Go on.
Happy to talk offline to our great neighbor.
Well, thank you so much, Colette and Megan, for coming today. Really informative kind of case study on what you guys are doing there. In my role at National RTAP, I see implementation of microtransit happening more and more across the country. So it's really informative to me as well. So like I said, we're a little behind schedule, so I'm just going to jump right to Bill Kuttner, who is a repeat attendee for RTAP or RTAC, and I welcome back.
All right, so I unmute myself and tell basic things. You can control. Can I advance things by myself, or do I have to tell Matt to advance the?
Nope. Bill, you can if you just click onto the slide, you will be able to use your keyboard, the arrow keys, to advance the slides.
Okay, well, here we go. Let me give this a try. Trucks at the Southampton Street bottleneck. That's it. Down. We'll show pictures. Let me. Oh, didn't work. How do I turn this on to? I wasn't.
So it on my end, it is showing that you have control of my screen, or you should have control of it, but you'll need to move your mouse, click onto the slide, and you should be able to. Now it says you're controlling it, so you should be able to use the arrow keys from here on. There we go.
Oh, I had to click on my show first to seize control. All right.
Indeed.
Okay, and I'm saying, all right, so why study this location? Oh, and why is this important to trucks? Let's walk through here. First of all, there are extensive, okay, I'm the freight analyst. This is a traffic study disguised as a truck study. I mean, this is an aerial photo of, can people see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so here we go. Where's there's the compass arrow. Up this way is downtown. Way up here is downtown Boston. You take the Southeast Expressway. It goes down to Dorchester. Here's the Mass Ave connector. We read about this area a lot in the paper every single day. You got some Melnia Cass Boulevard, which we'll talk about. And here's the MBTA. This is the commuter rail facility. Further up here is their Red Line facility. Here's Widette Circle. Technically should be Widette, but everybody calls it Widette. And here in the evening rush hour, what you see here in yellow, and I went out, saw it myself. This is a queue. This is solid cars, bumper to bumper, waiting to merge here on the Southeast Expressway. So, hence that's how this study gets its name. Trucks at the Southampton Street bottleneck. Here's the bottleneck. And it's important, extensive PMPQs impact all vehicles, not just trucks. So that's the, but interesting thing about the study, a lot of different issues interrelate. So, okay, so this is a key freight network junction. You've all seen this. I talk about critical urban freight corridors. This red line is something that the MPO designated as a freight corridor. And here it gets, this is that intersection. Here's the Southeast Expressway, downtown Boston, the Mass Ave connector. So it's a key junction for freight. There's a lot of queues. Use of the South, let me back up. There's the South Boston bypass road. And here I took a picture some early Sunday morning, got good light. Use of the South Boston bypass road is under review. It has certain rules. What are the rules? They're taking a look at it. And Widette Circle businesses may move. Here's Widette Circle, lots of things to eat. It's not just produce, but everything from animal, vegetable, mineral. It all happens there, and it gets trucked out to stores and restaurants and stuff. So those businesses might move. What are the implications? How important is it? And here we have some. So why study this? Okay, so these are the points I just made. Extensive PMPQs, important freight network. They're talking about what to do with the bypass road, and what about the business with that circle. And I went out, looked at many things. I hear a couple of findings, and these are actually the least important, but these are things I learned. And in the course of between daytime, and I generally only count trucks in the daytime, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's when you see most of them. There are 412 trucks a day left with that circle. With that circle is it's like a co-op. The businesses own the circle, and they could sell it to a developer, and they might move as a group. If they move somewhere, Canton, someplace else, somebody would say, how many trucks are there? And each business knows how many trucks it has, but you put them all, I went out there, counted, and that was the number. So if Widette Circle is going to move, if as a unit, this would be what the impact would be at their next location. And then 128 light commercial vehicles. These are four-wheeled vans during the same period. And another finding is, I did this study at the beginning of 2020. So things were normal. Then we had the pandemic shutdowns, and a lot of traffic disappeared. But what happened to truck traffic? And between beginning of my study, and I kept counting, and by the time I was done, I had all the data I wanted. there were a few places I was able to compare the truck volumes at the beginning of my counts and the truck volumes at the end of my counts, because I do it at different times of day. I'll do an hour here, an hour there, hour here, hour there, and then I collect them all together. And I saw that over the period of my, before the pandemic really, the business closures really kicked in, traffic had gone down about 9% over the period. So I figured I was counting all this at the time. So it's an average drop of like 5%. So I said, close enough. I was able to, even though I was at the beginning of the pandemic, I was able to use my results, so just, it comes to no surprise to you, most of the traffic's already back. But at the time I was doing this, I was getting this great data and asking myself, gee, can I really use it? Well, the answer is yes. And I had actually some data from earlier on. So now it's a bypass road findings, northbound. That's going from Southeast Expressway up towards the seaport, and anybody can use it. It's the northbound is unrestricted, and during the AM peak rush hour, about 450 vehicles traveling per hour. That's well within the capacity of the road. A single lane road has no problem taking 1,800, 2,000 cars an hour. There's even a signal up there cuts the traffic, but it's clearly has northbound capacity, and 2/3 of those 300 of those vehicles are private autos, people coming from the South Shore going to work are there, and 150 are these commercial vehicles, and there I already said it, say it again, well within road capacity, and at the time I did this study, presented it, I did the work almost 2 years ago, presented it 1 year ago to the MPO, and MassDOT is asking that the northbound restriction, which was lifted on a test basis, be made permanent, because they said there's no problem. I went out there and my findings looking at traffic corroborated that northbound works just fine, allowing all traffic. Now southbound, here we have, it is forbidden to private autos. So MassDOT was only asking to make northbound unrestricted. Southbound is private autos are not supposed to use it at any time. And people are curious, well, what does that mean? And now between 9 and 3 in the middle of the day, I saw 100 vehicles, cars, those are the authorized vehicles. Those are the trucks who used it between 9 and during the authorized vehicles, those are trucks and buses. And in the PM peak period, the trucks go down because they're going back to their motor pool. They get out and they deliver all their stuff in the morning, and then the smart thing to do is go back during the evening rush hour. But about 70 unauthorized vehicles per hour travel during the PM peak. So you go from 3 to 4, you get about 70 cars. They're not supposed to be there. I actually saw an enforcement action. I saw a state trooper out there. I talked with them, and we had a good talk. And sometimes it's usually a warning or stuff. But every hour between 3 and 6, you got 70 people sneaking out there. They're not supposed to. And so why do these people do it? Well, we'll get into this a little bit. And ambiguous southbound signage. So there in June 2019, that was about 7-8 months before I went out and started doing my field work. You're at a corner of Cypher Street and the South Boston Bypass Road. And what does it say? It says commercial vehicles only. And here September 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. What is missing? Well, so I'm out there counting, I saw 77, and actually I went out there with the state trooper. He took me in his cruiser, and we drove up and down and looked at these things, and where's the sign? Where's the sign? And so the Now the left turns you see over here says except commercial vehicles, but you know, this sign is missing, but this sign is still here. This sign is supposed to be here. You're supposed to say, you know, commercial. So 70 vehicles an hour didn't have the message. So now, so that's use of the bypass road, and the bottleneck. We'll get into the bypass road connects in with the bottleneck findings. So Interstate 93 can accommodate around 7,200 vehicles per hour south of Southampton Street on ramp, and that's today. But more than 7,200 vehicles actually want to use it. So and they're either on the central artery or they're on those surface streets I showed you that we're going to show that queue again. So lengthy queues formed during the PM peak period. That's what I showed you on one of my first slides on both 93 and the approaching streets. And about 100 trucks per hour enter at Southampton Street, and that's only 8% of the total ramp traffic. Because remember, towards the end of the day, trucks, you know, and that's also vans. That's all commercial vehicles. So the heavy trucks, the light trucks, at the end of the day, they don't want to be out there. They don't want to be in traffic. They've gone home. So that is not what's causing you know, it maxes out at 7,200. There's only 100 coming in, 100 trucks coming in from Southampton Street. Everything else is cars. I have a very, very detailed analysis of this in the memo, which you can, Matt, is there a link where people can download the memo? You just go to the MPO website.
There is, and once you're done presenting, I can throw that into the chat.
Okay, yeah, so it's under freight publications, and it goes in, you know, with great, you know, all the detailed numbers, all the calculations, the quotients, what gets divided by what to come up with some of these things is how much traffic you can get through that bottleneck. Don't worry, trucks are not the problem. You know, I am not advancing here.
Nope, you just advanced.
No, that's the last one. Oh, this was oh, thank you, Sandy. Okay, he's got the link there. You can go in the chat box. Of the 100 trucks, only 20 of them came from the bypass road, and you know, and that's per hour, and 100 the other 80 were coming from you know, Albany Street, you know the Mass Ave connector, you know, from all other places. So go back to bypass road, you had 70 cars an hour who aren't supposed to be there, and then you had 20 trucks coming from the bypass road. That is not the problem. It's two things. Trucks are not a problem causing the Southampton Street bottleneck because it's the evening rush hour, and 70 cars is too much. They got to get those signs back up there, and you don't want to allow southbound cars to use it. Okay, so implications. Trucks and light commercial vehicle traffic subsides prior to the PM peak. I probably said that 8-9 times so far. That's important. If you're looking at traffic in the PM, okay, let me say, evening rush hours are worse than morning rush hours because the morning rush hours, everybody's going to work. The evening rush hours, you get a combination of people going back from work and discretionary travel, you know, going out, taking kids to Little League, whatever. These happen at the same time. So the evening rush hours are worse than the morning rush hours. And the trucks know that. So when they set up their daily work schedules, they make a point of trying to get done early in the day and so they're not wasting time out there in the evening peak. And in the queue analysis, what do you do about the Southampton Street bottleneck? Trucks are not the problem. Okay, unrestricted southbound travel on bypass road. If you said anybody could use it, it would go up. That would be bad. And if you allowed more cars, it'd be hard. You can't make the queues, unless you add capacity, you can't make the queues go away, but you can sort of move them around. You say, well, the cars coming in the bypass road is not supposed to do that. Maybe they go another route, they'll end up in the queue, but they'll be on the queue on the Southeast Expressway farther up. They'll get on up farther north, and that's okay. If you have a queue and you have vehicles waiting their turn to get through the bottleneck, you would rather have those vehicles on the freeway waiting, where there's 4 or 5 lanes, and they fill up, they just wait, than have them out on a city street waiting. And the queue gets longer and longer and longer. It passes through intersections that can actually block intersections. So what you're doing is you're managing the queue. As long as if you don't add capacity at the bottleneck, then you can set up, you have more green time here, you have these different rules, but all you're doing is shifting the location of these cars. And you don't want them on the bypass road. If you're gonna have a queue, if you can't get rid of the queue, you'd rather have the cars waiting on the freeway. And some of these queues, this is another story, they go all through the Big Dig. They can extend up to Medford. Okay, that's sad but true, and it's happening now. You get very long, but you'd rather have these queues on the freeway than have them on the city streets. So there's the PMQ system I was talking about. So if you allowed cars to come through here unrestricted, they might block this intersection. So you say, well, let's give these people more green to get them through here. And if you give these people more green, then these people get more red. And this is it right here. This is the Suffolk County Jail. The end of that queue, a couple of years ago, I actually went and observed it. That's why I told our graphics guy to draw the queue back here, and I was just out there a couple months ago, and the queue was extending back to here, and the pandemic was still going on, and it's well, you don't, they don't go forever, but the queues, you don't want to let cars, if somebody in Seaport says, oh, we need more we need better access to the Seaport, don't let them go in, don't let them go in here, because if they do, it'll just make things worse. If people get back, if they go and get on somewhere else and they get in the queue back here, well, that's okay. You're better off having the cars waiting on I-93 than waiting here on Southampton, on all these other roads, which are trying to support local traffic. Okay, so managing the queue system, and without increased Interstate 93 capacity, only the locations of queuing vehicles can be managed. That's probably the 5th time I've said that, but it's important to remember that. There are adding signal time for increased bypass road traffic would lengthen the other queue branches. I just said that. You saw it with the picture. And it's already too close to Mass Ave, or at least it was last time before the pandemic. It's getting there again. And queues on limited access highways can better accommodate queuing traffic than city streets, which is okay. All right. Thank you. Say, okay. And now shrink the queues, auxiliary lane. Now this is, I understand they're sending some infrastructure money this way. Somebody should say, hey, how about, we got something we can do. Add an auxiliary lane between Southampton Street on-ramp and Columbia Road off-ramp. Okay, that would increase the merging capacity from Southampton Street would increase from about 1,250 to 1,450 an hour, and all the algebra you go through this. I walked you through that. The quotients, how I calculate the numerator and denominator, how I get this number. So if you just add the auxiliary, a 5th lane from Southampton that sort of ends at Columbia Road, that gives the traffic another 2 miles to sort of move in and out. And so we think we can get and you could, what you would do is you would shorten the Southampton Street queue complex, my huge picture, but you would lengthen the stuff on I-93 a little bit. It would extend from a little bit further back. And mainline queue would lengthen slightly, but if you added a 5th southbound lane on I-93 from Southampton Street all the way to the zipper lane, which the zipper lane isn't running now, but I hope everybody remembers the zipper lane. They used to add a lane in the morning, add a lane in the afternoon in the peak direction. If you could get a uniform 5 lanes all the way from the Southampton Street merge to Braintree, where the zipper lane goes at the end of the day, it would go, instead of going from, you would add 500 vehicles an hour, 500 additional vehicles per hour could get through at Southampton Street. And like I say, all the algebras in my report, and the main line queue would actually shorten. This is the thing, is with that 5th lane going from Southampton Street all the way to Braintree, the Southampton Street queues would shrink dramatically, but the mainline queues would also shorten somewhat. So it'd be something for everybody. So and major conclusions. Unrestricted use by bypass road northbound is not a problem. Removing the southbound bypass road restriction on private autos would exacerbate the PM queues, and reduce PM, John McQueen, I will get to that in a second. Reduce PM peak truck volumes, make these vehicles relatively unappointment in queue analysis, and queues in the South Bay area will be a problem until capacity is added on Interstate 93 in some manner. And thank you. Questions? Okay. I see hands up, but the way back, I don't know how many years ago, I did a study on adding a reversible lane on. Sandy, can you find my my study? Improving the Southeast Expressway conceptual plan. It was an MPO publication. If we could get that link up there, and I did, and it and if you add the extra lane, you also at the same time you yeah, and it's I forget, it's not a okay, Sandy, it's not a freight study. It's a regular study. It's a quarter, I don't know what it's called. You also add a second track on the Old Colony line, and the Old Colony Railroad line needs 2 tracks. So you're doing 2 things. You're adding a 9th lane. So right now you have you everybody see my finger? You have 4 and 4. You're putting a 5th lane and a 9th lane in the middle that can be reversed. And you're also going to the Old Colony, which has 1 track, and you're adding a second track. This makes it very expensive. And you're not, and if you're doing it without land takings, where there's or not a lot of land take, it's probably around like $2 billion, complete reconstruction of a couple miles worth of I-93 and the Old Colony. So you're doubling the capacity, more than doubling the capacity of Old Colony. You're making a major reconstruction of I-93. I know that the late Frank DePaula paid, sponsored a study, but it was not man-made, it was an internal feasibility plan of, how do you do it? And those are some of the ballpark numbers I got. So it has been looked. I know the auxiliary lane has also been looked at. So it costs real money, but people should look, but it costs real benefits. If you don't add the capacity, you're simply managing things. So anyway, that's the questions. Who's moderating this?
That would be me.
Okay.
So that's got a pretty significant price tag, but probably well worth it. I'm going to go in order again. So Franny was the first one with her hand up, so I'll let you go.
I'm always full of questions. I have 2 questions, and I'm going to ask them first and then put myself on mute. One is, you seem to be very good at looking at traffic and measuring it by yourself. And I'm wondering how much new technologies have helped that process in time, such as maybe taking pictures of license plates, and how do you tell what's a commercial vehicle and what's not, and working with the
I think we're cutting out a little bit.
Oh, no. Here, let me move a little.
We got most of what you said.
Well, okay. So one question is how technology has helped your work, because you seem to do a lot of actual physical watching. And the second question is, how much of the congestion you're looking at do you, who've looked at this congestion for many years, believe would be alleviated by building the north-south rail link between South Station and North Station?
Yeah, well, okay. Two things. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, first of all, getting the data. One of the things that when I go out in the field, I also tend to count turning movements, classified turning move. When you have these little tabulating boards, you got 16 buttons, but you have 3 options. So 3 times 16 is 48. So I will routinely do counts of like 30, 32 or 42 aspects. So I'm getting the different classes of vehicles and how they turn. So technology usually doesn't help. It's not something, oh, you can do, we can do something that I can't even go and hire. It's sort of a labor of love as I do this. And then when I get this data, I can get sort of major aggregates of data. Plus I can also see certain flows of how things are turning. So in my text, I can say, well, most of the traffic seems to be going this way and most of it's going that way. That's because I went out and saw it with my own eyes. And then even for classification, you say, how do you know that a van, just a 4-wheeled van, it could be taking kids to the boys club, or it could be a plumber. Now, those are 2 very different trick tables, and you have to see it because the machine cannot tell the difference between, cannot tell the difference between those, and including hazardous cargoes. Come to my meeting, come to the MPO meeting next week, and I will be talking about hazardous cargoes. If you can't see the red diamond, the red placard, you do not know if it's a hazardous cargo. So the trick is not to get technology to do your work for you. If you do the work, make sure you're pulling in as much information as you possibly can. Now, as I said, this was a traffic study disguise. I went and looked at freight because there were truck issues. How many trucks, where they're going and stuff. But we also have this bottleneck. And if you had a major investment, and that you can, there's 2 things. There's building your way out of congestion and building your way out of a bottleneck. If these cars are waiting for that bottleneck because they don't want to drive on Mass. They don't want to go on Morrissey Boulevard or Dorchester Ave. They would rather be on the freeway. That's why the bottleneck is on the freeway. The freeway is the preferred route. Now, if you had a major investment like the North-South Rail Link, which I think would carry lots of people, not just lots of people, but long distances. That's the other trick, is get somebody out of the car of a long trip. You could call a lot of traffic out of the roadway system, significant amount, and not a panacea. But the remaining traffic still wants to go in the prime corridors. So you would still, you would still have a bottleneck at remember I told you at Southampton Street, there's that queue on the freeway goes back to Somerville and Medford. Now, if you build the North-South Rail Link, the queue might simply go back to Charlestown or something. You would shorten the queue, but you would still have the bottleneck is there because between Boston and south of Boston, that is the only route. So any vehicle, no matter how many transit services you have, any vehicle going south is going to want to go on the Southeast Expressway. It is simply overwhelmed by its demand that even these major improvements are not going to solve. So you're always going to have a queue. So so building, so I look at this package deal. You add an extra line to you add an extra line to the Old Colony. You go from 1 track to 2 tracks. The other thing, I would say the extra lane would be an HOV lane. You run your HOV lane, and that's great for your Plymouth, Brockton, Peter Pan, Logan Express, all the, it would really help your BRT services. You don't even have to run the BRT. The BRT, they'll find themselves, Peter Pan and Plymouth and Brockton are perfectly capable of building their own ridership markets as long as their buses are actually moving and not sitting in that queue, So anyway, my study on this that was done earlier, improving the Southeast Expressway conceptual plan. I hope Sandy finds it or something. And okay, next question. Who's next?
Okay, we got Leonard is next.
Yep, and I'll be quick. Yeah, thanks. And the reason I wanted you to talk with us at this meeting, Bill, was because I know that you're retiring, and I thought you might not be available after the end of the year. My understanding is that you might be around for a couple of months and that you might be available for consulting. So I think we'll have you back because what I really want to explore with you is how do we how do we handle freight, especially with respect to bicycle lanes, any insights you might have regarding that. And something else I'd like you to contemplate answering, maybe sooner rather than later, maybe by email, is what studies would you like to see done for freight in the UPWP? So I know you have a lot of input into the process, but it'd be great to hear your thinking about studies that should be done so that when we see them in the universe, we can speak more intelligently towards them and maybe even advocate for them more strongly. So I'm not going to ask you to answer those questions now. We'll talk later, but I just wanted to save some time because I know Andy has his hand up and we're running a little short. So thank you for joining us, and it's been great having you as part of CTPS. Man, always enjoy your presentations and your energy and your spirit. So take care. Good luck.
Okay, thank you, Leonard. And Sandy found in the chat box. Sandy found my Southeast Expressway study. Thank you, Sandy. And who's next here?
So I think that's me. So Bill, hi, good to see you again. I think adding on to what Len said, I think you have probably the most passion for freight out of any professional that I've met. And so I really appreciate that you're always thinking about kind of those needs. One of the things that I was thinking about with what you presented, I think one of the things that really does pop in my mind is I think Cambridge, the city that I kind of represent here, and also Boston and quite a bit of the other municipalities have shifted our thinking in terms of how we look at transportation issues in a way that I think might be in conflict with some of the analysis here. And so I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it. So one of the things that we've deprioritized over the past, I think, 5 or 10 years or so, has been looking at the idea of the queues being the source of the problem that we're trying to resolve. Rather, it is that reliability of travel times is really one of the most important things that people, I think, value. And so queues themselves aren't necessarily the issue, right? So it's that the queue is more or less the same every day in a pretty economically vibrant area is really what we're going for. So, I think the idea of adding a 5th lane on 93 headed out of Boston toward the South Shore, I think isn't necessarily going to be prioritized from that kind of perspective of things like that. I think cities like Boston and Cambridge prioritize making sure that our regional highway system is safe, that people don't have crashes, that capacity is important only in that, sometimes if you have completely soaked up all the capacity on the roadway, you get some unsafe behaviors. and making sure that we don't lead ourselves into those kind of situations. But adding capacity isn't necessarily something that we're looking to do. So some of the conclusions that you're coming to, I look at the same kind of things that you were just kind of talking about in analysis, and I'm wondering if you have any kind of comments on kind of maybe different aims, and maybe if there would be a different set of conclusions or recommendations, if maybe that's kind of clawed back into maybe the way that we kind of look at things here, at least in Cambridge.
Well, I mean, the safest thing is to identify patterns in the transportation system, try to locate them, quantify them, and this becomes sort of the raw materials for decision making. And obviously decision making gets made in other venues, both regionally with our locally. We go back to the old freeway revolt in the 60s and 70s. Remember, south of Boston, there was going to be the Southeast Expressway, which dates from the 1950s, and the Southwest Expressway. And the Southwest Expressway was canceled, and with BTPR. So that meant the Southeast Expressway is the only major limited access corridor, coming out of the south. Now, if you get sort of long-term secular growth, people, more people, more jobs, new workers entering the labor force and stuff, the burdens on that corridor, gradually increase. Now the queues are simply a circumstance, and what do you do with them? So I said, so two things. First of all, you'd rather have the queue on the limited access highway than out on the city streets, or that's my opinion. Maybe other people think they'd rather have them in the city streets. But what I'm doing is finding out where the queues are. I just stood there and saw the end of the queues, and that's when my Ken Dumas, our graphics guy, drew the map. I said, draw it to here, draw it to here, draw it to here, because those are the queues that I saw. So now, if somebody steps up and wants to do something about this, and even like these roads don't last forever, they have to get rebuilt on a certain cycle. Who uses the roads? All your buses use the roads, all your carpools, so they're shared by everybody. So I say, if you have a replacement cycle of your road anyway, think about ways that you could accommodate the fact that this is your only north-south corridor, and then you're also your poor old colony. They every day they cross their fingers, or let's not have a breakdown because we're trying to operate on one single track, and now say, oh, by the way, can we have commuter service down to the Cape? I say, remember, you only have one track, so that we cancel one freeway, everything has to go down that one corridor. I'm just sort of laying out sort of, where are the bottlenecks, where, lay these things, and these become the raw materials for the people who are going to actually make it, and people are going to have to sign the checks and program the work. This is raw materials. So they may say, is this the kind of thing that's going to, that should this be part of the regional investment mix? So yes, I mean, I fully think that the perspectives of, you mentioned, you said, Boston, Cambridge, and many people, the perspectives that you enunciated, and some of the, I'm out there, some of the stuff that I see, I think there is room for overlap, for putting our heads together on it, and say, what do we think? What are we going to do? These roads don't last forever. They have a natural replacement cycle. Every bridge needs to be rebuilt. Why not, think differently about, what you do with the corridor? So who's next?
I do not see any other hands up right now. I wanted to just read a couple of the comments. I'm sure everybody can see them, but John Seward had said that this shows that we may not be able to build out of congestion, basically. If it's kind of like I think what he's getting at is the if you build it, they will come situation where you just keep building lanes and you keep getting more traffic because it gets easier to drive, and then it gets harder to drive because there's more traffic on the road. And then it's like, how do you solve it? And that kind of leads into Skylar. He said, Bill's presentations are always very interesting, and I can see how solving this is nearly infeasible. So those are just a couple things that people put in the chat there. But does anybody else have any questions before? It doesn't look like it. So I just want to thank you, Bill. Hopefully we get to have you one more time before you're you don't want to come back anymore, because I'm sure that will happen eventually. But we love having you. You know, it's always an insightful conversation.
Yeah, I enjoy going to the advisory council because yeah, at the MPO the clock's always ticking. Boom, you know. But here, you know, we really get in these you know, these broad-based discussions. You know, I want to, and actually when I'm in person, I always invite people to ask questions in the middle of my talk. It's sort of harder to do remotely, but it's I like this, and I'm presenting to the MPO on hazardous cargoes, you know, with the red placards next week, and yeah, thanks. So, and next week, and once it goes to the MPO, then I'll be ready. You can schedule me in here. I will make a point of doing the hazardous cargoes one.
Great.
All right.
Looks like Len, did you have something?
No, I was just saying thanks, Bill. I was kind of waving and I was talking, but
yeah.
Thanks,
Okay,
Bill.
I'm going to take off. I still have stuff I have to do here, and thank you. It's been great. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
You're very
Bye-bye.
welcome. Okay, bye.
Okay, so we are running over time a little bit, so I'm going to hand it right over to Len for his chair's report.
Okay, yeah, I think yeah, I'm gonna make this really quick, and we'll get people out by 4:15. So there were a few interesting meetings. Since our last meeting here, there was a congestion management meeting, and they did a bike parking study at MBTA stations, and that was interesting. Their conclusion is just that we have increased the number of spaces, but the utilization rate is roughly the same, about 50% versus what it was the last time they did the study about 4 years ago. And I asked if it might be possible, if it was a good idea, or at least feasible, to study bike parking at the ends of bus routes, because right now they only do stations, and Ryan Hicks thought it was a good idea. I certainly didn't see any feasibility issues, so it might be something for us to propose in the UPWP. Also, Betsy Harvey presented on 10 years of blue bikes in the area, and they were viewing it primarily through an equity lens, and so that's a very good thing to check out. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat, because I found that if you generate a PDF of it, it doesn't give you the full report, because I guess it uses a lot of GIS data in an interactive way. So actually, I'll drop it in right after I finish talking. But I think it'll be interesting to have Betsy come and talk with us about that. And also, there's a Future to Curb guidebook, which I need to read through more closely, but I think that's going to warrant a visit by the authors of that, because I'm going to really pay attention to it with respect to the freight bike lane nexus. And so that's it for the report on the from meetings I've attended. For new business, I want to say that I want to explore more this idea of just having subject matter experts dealing with things. And I'm thinking that maybe Franny could be our subject matter expert on regional transit associations, especially since she pays attention to that. And I know Mr. John Stewart has often brought up the notion of big ideas and how do we think about what we want. That's certainly something that I care about. And I know the advisory board, the MPO is working on scenario planning, but I'd like for us to actually try to come up with some big ideas. It's kind of not so much a scenario plan as much as it is what do we think would be the best system that we could design, in 20 30, 40 years from now. And so I want to ask John if he would think about me being the person who kind of leads the charge on that, and we could maybe have that on the agenda for 10 or 15 minutes every meeting. If he doesn't want to, I'll do it. But I think it's kind of worth exploring. It'll replace the reading that we were doing, right, for the needs assessment, because that's all done. So that's it. Next meeting, I'm hoping to have Tegan and Cape Victor for the annual visit with us, and we'll have Sandy or whomever is the new UPWP director come and talk with us about that, and so start thinking about ideas for the next UPWP. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Len. If nobody else has anything else, I think we're actually, I think we're gonna make it on time here today. So anybody else have anything that they wanted to add? Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, sorry, Andy.
I just wanted to say happy holidays to everybody. Just because it is that month of all the end of the year holidays. It's been quite a wild couple years, and the consistency of the RTAC has actually been really helpful for me. It's really nice to look forward to these meetings, even if I can't stay all the time. So just happy holidays.
Thank you.
Andy, you make me feel so good. Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.
And Len did put that link in the chat, just so you know. And anyway, so happy holidays. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
Since I'm not the go ahead. So, no, please.
Sorry. Looks like John. Do I have
I'll
a second? Okay, Franny seconds. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and we will see you next time.
Next year.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.